February 19th, 1945. 090. 2 hours. Beach Green 1, Iwo Jima. Superior Private Yamazaki. Kenji pressed himself deeper into the volcanic sand at the bottom of his fighting hole, his hands clamped over his ears. His eyes squeezed shut against the storm of explosions that had been shaking the island for 3 days. The American naval bombardment had transformed the landscape above into a churning nightmare of fire and steel. But here, 15 feet beneath the surface in the tunnels, his unit had spent months carving from the volcanic rock. He had survived. The bombardment stopped. In the sudden silence, Yamazaki could hear his own heartbeat, the ragged breathing of the men around him, the distant crash of waves on the beach 800 meters away. Then came a new sound, a sound he had been trained to expect, a sound that meant the moment had finally arrived. The grinding of tank treads on volcanic ash. Yamazaki climbed the narrow passage to his observation post, a slit in the rock face that overlooked the terrace where his company's main defensive position waited. Through the slit, he could see the beach below, black sand churned gray by shell fire, and crawling across it like beetles emerging from the sea. The American tanks, he had been briefed on American armor. The M4 Sherman, his officers had told him, was inferior to Japanese anti-tank weapons at close range. The Type 97 anti-tank rifle could penetrate its side armor. The lunge mine, the satchel charge, the magnetic mine, all could kill a Sherman if a brave soldier could get close enough. The tanks were dangerous, but not invincible. They could be stopped. Yamazaki watched the tanks crawling toward the first terrace, their turrets traversing, their machine guns spitting fire at positions they could not see. Behind them came the American infantry, crouching, running, falling. The machine guns in the pillboxes along the terrace opened up, and Americans began to die on the black sand. Then one of the tanks did something Yamazaki had never seen before, had never imagined, had never been briefed to expect. A tongue of liquid fire erupted from the tank's hull, not from its cannon, but from a nozzle mounted where the bow machine gun should have been. The fire was not like an explosion, not like a shell burst, not like anything Yamazaki had ever witnessed. It was alive. Alive. It flowed like water, clung like honey, reached into the firing slit of the nearest pillbox, and filled the space inside with burning death. The screaming started immediately. Yamazaki could hear it even through 15 feet of rock, even over the crash of naval guns resuming their fire, even over the rattle of machine guns and the crack of rifles. Men were burning inside that pillbox, burning alive, and their screams were unlike any sound of war Yamazaki had heard in 3 years of fighting. The tank moved to the next position. Fire erupted again. More screaming. Yamazaki felt something he had never felt before in his military career, something his training had never prepared him to handle, something that contradicted everything he had been taught about the spirit of the Japanese soldier felt. Terror. What Yamazaki witnessed that morning was the combat debut of a weapon that would transform the battle for Iwo Jima and haunt Japanese defenders in their nightmares for the remaining months of the war. The M4A3 Sherman tank equipped with the E4-5 mechanized flamethrower, soon to be known simply as the Ronson or the Zippo, had arrived in the Pacific Theater. The weapon would prove more devastating, more terrifying, and more effective than any other single system deployed against Japanese fortifications. It would kill thousands of Japanese soldiers in ways that defied description. It would break the morale of defenders who had sworn to die for their emperor. It would make men who had charged machine guns and artillery fire with nothing but bayonets and hand grenades flee in blind panic from positions they had vowed to hold to the last man. This is the story of how American engineers created a mechanized nightmare, how that nightmare was unleashed on the volcanic fortress of Iwo Jima, and how Japanese soldiers experienced the particular horror of facing fire that could not be stopped, could not be avoided, could not be survived. But the modern military flamethrower emerged from the First World War, when German engineers developed portable devices capable of projecting streams of burning fuel at enemy trenches. but they were never banned. And as the technology developed, military planners recognized that fire possessed unique tactical advantages that other weapons could not match. The United States military had experimented with flamethrower weapons throughout the interwar period, developing portable units that an individual soldier could carry. These man-portable flamethrowers proved effective in limited tactical situations, particularly against bunkers and caves, but they had severe limitations. A portable flamethrower weighed approximately 70 pounds, fully loaded. Its fuel supply permitted only about 10 seconds of continuous flame. The range was typically 40 to 50 yards at maximum. The operator was vulnerable, carrying a tank of highly flammable fuel on his back while approaching enemy positions, and the weight and bulk made it impossible to carry other weapons or equipment. The answer was the mechanized flamethrower, a flame weapon mounted on a tank chassis. The Soviets experimented with various designs. The Germans deployed limited numbers of Flampanzer vehicles on both fronts. American development focused on adapting the standard M4 Sherman tank to carry an integrated flamethrower system. The solution developed by the Chemical Warfare Service and implemented by the Ordnance Department was elegant in its brutality. The bow machine gun position on the Sherman was removed and replaced with a flame projector nozzle connected to an internal fuel tank. Range was approximately 90 yards with napalm-thickened fuel, extending to over 100 yards with some formulations. Unthickened gasoline burns rapidly but disperses quickly and does not adhere to add a thickening agent, typically aluminum naphthenate, combined with aluminum palmitate, to create what became known as napalm, and the characteristics changed dramatically. Napalm clings it, adheres to surfaces, to clothing, to skin. It burns at temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. It is nearly impossible to extinguish with water, which tends to spread the burning gel rather than suppress it. It continues burning even when deprived of external oxygen, as the thickening agents contain sufficient oxidizers to sustain combustion. When projected into an enclosed space, napalm does not merely burn what it touches. It consumes all available oxygen, creating a superheated vacuum. It produces toxic gases, primarily carbon monoxide, that kill those who escape the flames themselves. It radiates heat, intense enough to cause fatal burns without direct contact. The temperature spike can ignite materials throughout the enclosed space, turning a bunker or tunnel into a crematorium. The Sherman tank provided the ideal delivery platform. Its armor protected the fuel tanks and the crew from small arms fire and most anti-tank weapons. Its mobility allowed it to approach fortifications that would stop infantry. Its main gun and machine guns could suppress defenders while the flamethrower was brought to bear, and it could carry enough fuel for extended operations, unlike the portable units that emptied in seconds. The psychological effect as American planners anticipated and Japanese defenders would soon discover, was devastating. First Lieutenant James Kelly of the 713th Armored Flamethrower Battalion, one of the specialized units equipped with the new weapons, described his introduction to the system during training at the Hawaiian Flamethrower School. "They showed us what the weapon could do against a mock bunker," Kelly recalled decades later. "The fuel went in through the firing slit like water through a drain. Then it ignited. The whole inside of that bunker lit up orange, and you could feel the heat from 50 yards away. The dummy targets inside were burned to ash in about 10 seconds. One of the guys in my platoon started crying. He said he was glad we'd have this, but he felt sorry for whoever was on the receiving end. I think we all felt that way." The 713th arrived at Iwo Jima as part of the massive assault force assembled for Operation Detachment. The battalion had been activated specifically to support operations against Japanese fortifications, equipped with 54 Sherman tanks modified with E-45 flamethrower systems. These tanks would operate in direct support of infantry, called forward whenever fortified positions proved resistant to conventional attack. Iwo Jima was the perfect proving ground for the new weapon, though perfect seems a perverse word to apply to that sulphurous hellscape. The island measured barely 8 square miles, a volcanic protrusion in the western Pacific, approximately 750 miles south of Tokyo. Its strategic value lay in its airfields, which could be used to support B-29 bombing raids on the Japanese homeland and provide emergency landing facilities for damaged bombers returning from missions. The Japanese understood the island's importance, as well as the Americans did. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayoshi, commanding the defense, had transformed Iwo Jima into the most heavily fortified position in the Pacific. His engineers had spent months constructing a network of tunnels, bunkers, pillboxes, and fighting positions that honeycombed the island's volcanic rock. Unlike earlier Japanese commanders who had wasted their forces in futile banzai charges, Kuribayashi planned a defense in depth designed to make the Americans pay for every yard in blood. His 21,000 defenders would fight from concealed positions, emerge from tunnels behind advancing Americans, and die in place rather than waste themselves in suicidal attacks. The fortifications were extraordinary. Miles of tunnels connected fighting positions throughout the island. Underground rooms provided shelter from the heaviest bombardment. Firing positions were constructed with overlapping fields of fire, so that attacking any one position exposed the attacker to fire from multiple others. Artillery and mortars were pre-registered on likely approach routes. Everything was designed to maximize American casualties. Against these defenses, conventional weapons had limited effect. The naval bombardment that preceded the landing, the heaviest yet delivered against any Pacific objective, destroyed many surface positions, but left the underground network largely intact. American planners anticipated heavy casualties. They got Tim. On D-Day, February 19, 1945, the Marines landed against opposition and grew heavier with every passing hour. Japanese fire from Mount Suribachi to the south and the high ground to the north turned the beaches into killing grounds. By nightfall, 2,420 Americans had been killed or wounded, and the advance had covered only a fraction of the planned distance. It was into this maelstrom that the flamethrower tanks made their combat debut. The first confirmed use of mechanized flamethrowers on Iwo Jima occurred on D+1, February 20th, when tanks of the 713th supported the advance of the 23rd Marine Regiment against fortified positions on the approaches to the first airfield. Sergeant Robert Leeming commanded one of the first flamethrower tanks committed to action. His after-action report, preserved in military archives, provides a visceral account of the weapon's effectiveness. "We received a call from a rifle company pinned down by fire from a reinforced bunker approximately 50 yards ahead of the infantry line. Conventional weapons had failed to neutralize the position. We moved forward under covering fire from the infantry and positioned the tank approximately 30 yards from the bunker. Is main aperture. Upon my command, the flame gunner, Corporal Willis, activated the projector. The fuel stream entered the bunker aperture and ignited immediately upon contact. The interior of the bunker became fully involved within approximately 2 seconds. We observed flames exiting from secondary apertures on the bunker's flanks and rear. Japanese personnel began emerging from the bunker rear exit approximately 5 seconds after flame initiation. These personnel were on fire, Infantry disposed of them with rifle fire. No personnel escaped the bunker alive. We remained in position for approximately 30 seconds to ensure complete neutralization. The infantry then advanced past the bunker and continued the attack. Total time from arrival to resumption of advance was less than 2 minutes. The clinical language of the report obscures the horror of what occurred inside that bunker. Men burning alive, screaming, beating at flames that could not be extinguished, breathing air hot enough to sear their lungs, watching their comrades die in agony beside them. The bunker that had stopped a rifle company, that might have held 4 hours against conventional attack, was eliminated in less than 2 minutes. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese defenders was immediate and devastating. Private First Class Yoshida Hiroshi, one of the few Japanese soldiers who survived the battle through capture, described the effect of the flamethrower tanks in post-war interviews. We had been told the Americans were soft, that they lacked the warrior spirit, that their machines could not defeat the Japanese soldier who was willing to die. We believed this. We were prepared to die fighting their tanks with explosives in our bare hands if necessary. Then we saw the fire tanks. Hamada's position was 30 meters from mine. The American tank approached, and fire came from its hull like water from a hose. But it was not water. It was liquid fire that flowed into every crack, every hole, every space. Hamada and his men began screaming. They screamed for perhaps 10 seconds, and then they stopped screaming. I understood then that I would die on this island. We all would, but I had not known until that moment how terrible the dying would be. Yoshida's testimony reflects a transformation in Japanese psychology that occurred rapidly once the flamethrower tanks appeared. The Bushido code that animated Japanese military culture emphasized death before dishonor, the willingness to sacrifice one's life for the emperor without hesitation. Japanese soldiers had demonstrated this willingness countless times, charging into certain death with a fervor that astonished and horrified their opponents. But the code had not prepared them for fire. Death by bullet, by bayonet, by explosion. These deaths could be faced with the dignity that Bushido demanded. A soldier could charge a machine gun knowing that death would be quick, that he would fall as a warrior, that his sacrifice would have meaning. Death by fire was different. There was no dignity in burning. There was no warrior's death in screaming as flames consumed your flesh. There was no honor in suffocating in a hole filled with superheated gas, clawing at walls that offered no escape. The flamethrower tanks attacked not just Japanese bodies, but Japanese minds. They made meaningless the spiritual preparations that Japanese soldiers had undertaken. They reduced the warrior's death to animal panic. Lieutenant Colonel Takeichi Nisi, a famous Olympic equestrian who commanded a tank unit on Iwo Jima, reportedly told his men after the first day of flamethrower attacks that they now faced a weapon against which courage meant nothing. Fire does not care if you are brave or cowardly, he said, according to survivors' accounts. Fire burns both the same way. The Americans recognized the psychological effect and exploited it deliberately. Flamethrower tanks were employed not only against positions that resisted conventional attack, but also against positions that might resist, as demonstrations of what awaited defenders who did not surrender. Major Paul Tretill, executive officer of the 713th Armored Flamethrower Battalion, explained the tactical approach. We learned very quickly that the threat of the flamethrower was almost as valuable as the flamethrower itself. When infantry encountered a bunker or cave entrance, they would call up the flame tank. Often, the tank's approach alone would cause Japanese to flee their positions or surrender. They had seen what the weapon did. They knew what was coming. Some of them preferred capture or death by rifle fire to what they knew would happen if they stayed. This psychological exploitation was systematic. Tank commanders would position their vehicles in clear view of Japanese positions and wait, allowing defenders to contemplate what was about to happen. Some crews reported that they could see Japanese soldiers watching them, faces visible in apertures, frozen with indecision. Corporal Tomas Hernandez, a flame gunner with the 713th, described one such encounter. We pulled up in front of a bunker complex, maybe 3 or 4 fighting positions all connected. The infantry had told us there were probably 15 or 20 Japs in there. We just sat there for a minute, letting them look at us. I had the flame projector pointed right at the main aperture. About 30 seconds later, a Japanese officer came out of a side entrance with his hands up. Then more of them, maybe a dozen total. They surrendered. To a tank. Japanese soldiers surrendering because they were afraid of how we would kill them. I never thought I'd see that. Not all Japanese chose surrender. Many, perhaps most, chose to die rather than accept the dishonor of capture. But even these chose to die by other means than fire when they could. Accounts from the battle describe Japanese soldiers emerging from burning positions to be shot by American infantry, choosing bullets over flames. Others used grenades on themselves as flames approached, preferring instantaneous death to the agony of burning. Some, trapped without means of quick death, simply burned, their screams echoing across the volcanic landscape until they stopped. The tactical effectiveness of the flamethrower tanks exceeded all expectations. Positions that had held up rifle companies for hours were neutralized in minutes. Cave complexes that had defied demolition charges were sealed with walls of flame. Tunnel systems were transformed into charnel houses as fire swept through the underground passages. The advance on Mount Suribachi, the volcanic peak that dominated the southern portion of Iwo Jima, demonstrated the weapon's tactical value. The mountain was riddled with caves and tunnels, its slopes fortified with interlocking positions that seemed impervious to attack. Captain Edward Munford, commanding a company of the 28th Marine Regiment, led the assault on positions at the base of Suribachi on D+2. We'd been hitting those caves all morning with everything we had: naval gunfire, airstrikes, artillery, direct fire from tanks, demolition charges. Nothing worked. They just went back into the tunnels and waited us out, then came back to their positions when we advanced. Around 1400, the flame tanks came up. The first cave they hit, you could hear the screaming from 200 yards away. The second cave, they put flame into the entrance. And about 10 seconds later, Japanese started coming out of another entrance 50 yards away. The whole tunnel system was connected, and the fire went everywhere. After that, we advanced. The caves that had stopped us for hours were empty. Dead Japanese burned Japanese, or empty. The fire had done in 30 minutes what we couldn't do in 6 hours to advance up. Suribachi culminated on February 23rd with the famous flag raising that became the iconic image of the Pacific War. The photograph captured Marines planting the American flag on the summit, a moment of triumph after 4 days of savage fighting. What the photograph did not capture, what the iconic image could not convey, was the smell that permeated the mountain slopes. Burned flesh, burned fuel, burned everything. The stench of what the flamethrower tanks had done to make that flag raising possible. Private First Class Ira Hayes, one of the flag raisers, reportedly could not escape that smell for the rest of his life. It followed him home, into his nightmares, into the alcoholism that would eventually kill him. He never spoke publicly about what he had seen on the slopes of Suribachi, but those who knew him said he carried it always. The battle for the rest of Iwo Jima continued for another month, and the flamethrower tanks remained at the center of every major engagement. The central plateau of the island, honeycombed with Japanese fortifications, was reduced methodically by combined infantry armor teams. The tactic became standardized. Infantry would identify fortified positions, call up flame tanks, and then advance past the burning wreckage of what had been strong points. The 4th Tank Battalion's War Diary for March 3, 1945, provides a representative sample of operations. 08. OA. Company B. Flame tanks in support of 2nd Battalion. 23rd Marines. 3 cave positions neutralized with flame. Estimated enemy killed, 2509 for 5. Company B flame tanks called to neutralize pillbox complex. 2 pillboxes destroyed by flame. Enemy attempted counterattack from tunnel exit, suppressed by infantry. Estimated enemy killed, 15. 11:30. Company A flame tanks in support of 1st Battalion, 24th Marines. Major cave complex neutralized. Flame projected into cave entrance resulted in secondary explosions, possibly ammunition storage. Estimated enemy killed, 50 plus. 1400. Company of flame tanks engaged blockhouse position. Heavy enemy fire received during approach. Tank commander wounded. Flame projector malfunction. withdrew for repair. Position subsequently neutralized by naval gunfire. 1615. Companies see flame tanks in support of 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines. 2 large cave positions and 3 fighting holes neutralized with flame. Estimated enemy killed 35. The cumulative effect of these operations was devastating. Japanese defenders died by the hundreds in their fortifications, killed by weapons that offered no chance of survival. Those who fled the fire died in the open, cut down by infantry. Those who stayed burned. By the battle's end, the 713th Armored Flamethrower Battalion had expended over 180,000 gallons of napalm. Their tanks had engaged over 600 fortified positions. Estimated enemy killed by direct flame attack exceeded 4,500, nearly a quarter of the entire Japanese garrison. These numbers do not capture the full effect, as they exclude those killed by infantry fire while fleeing flame attacks, those who suffocated in tunnels filled with toxic gases, those who died of burns in the hours and days after attacks. The true number of Japanese deaths attributable to the flamethrower tanks was certainly higher, possibly much higher. The weapon's effectiveness was not lost on Japanese high command. Reports reaching Tokyo from Iwo Jima emphasized the terror the flame tanks inspired and the difficulty of countering them. Urgent messages requested information about American flamethrower tactics and potential countermeasures. There were no effective countermeasures. The tanks were too heavily armored for most Japanese anti-tank weapons. Their range exceeded that of Japanese portable flamethrowers. The thickened fuel could not be stopped or deflected. Once a flame tank reached attack position, the defenders in its sights were doomed. Some Japanese units attempted to counter the tanks with conventional anti-tank tactics. Suicide attacks with lunge mines and satchel charges killed several flame tank crewmen during the battle. But these attacks required getting close to the tank, and getting close to a flame tank meant entering the weapon's effective range. Many would-be tank killers were burned to death before they could complete their attacks. Lieutenant Yamamoto, Ichiro, who commanded an anti-tank squad, survived several attempts to destroy flame tanks before being captured in late March. "We trained to attack tanks from close range," Yamamoto recalled. "We knew we would die, but we would take the tank with us. This was acceptable. This was honorable. Against the fire tanks, there was no honor. We would charge, and fire would come, and men would burn. I saw Corporal Tanaka running with his lunge mine, and fire hit him, and he was burning but still running. And then he fell, and was burning on the ground, screaming. The tank did not stop. It moved to another position and burned more of my men. I ordered retreat. I did not know what else to do. We had been trained to die attacking tanks. We had not been trained for this." Yamamoto's account illustrates the fundamental problem Japanese defenders faced. Their doctrine, their training, their entire military culture was built around the willingness to die in combat. The flamethrower tanks did not negate this willingness. They made it irrelevant. Men willing to die still died, but they died screaming in flames rather than falling honorably in battle. The psychological collapse that resulted affected even the most determined defenders. Reports from the final weeks of the battle described Japanese soldiers who had been fighting with suicidal determination suddenly surrendering at the approach of flame tanks. Others, refusing to surrender but unwilling to burn, killed themselves with grenades or threw themselves on American bayonets. Sergeant Maja Ito Hisokichi, the highest-ranking Japanese NCO, captured on Iwo Jima, provided extensive debriefings after the battle. His testimony described the effect of the flame tanks on unit cohesion. In the beginning, the men fought as they had been trained. They knew they would die, and they accepted this. When the fire tanks came, something changed. Men who had been brave became afraid. Men who had sworn to die began to talk of surrender. I tried to maintain discipline. I told them that death by fire was still death for the emperor, still honorable, still meaningful, but I could see in their eyes that they did not believe me. They had seen the fire. They had heard the screaming. They knew what awaited them. By the end, I could not force men into positions that faced the fire tanks. They would refuse. They would flee. Some killed themselves rather than face the fire. The fire had broken something in them that bullets and shells could not break. The breaking of Japanese morale on Iwo Jima represented a significant development in the Pacific War. Previous battles had demonstrated Japanese soldiers' willingness to fight to the last man, to die rather than surrender, to resist long past the point where Western soldiers would have given up. This willingness had made every Pacific battle a bloodbath. On Iwo Jima, for the first time, significant numbers of Japanese soldiers surrendered or abandoned their positions. Not many, by Western standards, but enough to represent a departure from established patterns. And among those who did surrender, the overwhelming majority cited the flamethrower tanks as the primary reason for their decision. Private Nakamura, Yoshio, captured on March 15th, was one of many who told similar stories. I was willing to die. Every soldier was willing to die. This was our duty, our honor. But death should have meaning. Death should serve the emperor. In the fire, there is no meaning. There is only pain and screaming and the smell of burning meat. I saw my friend, Hayashi, burn. He screamed for 2 minutes before he died. 2 minutes of screaming. This is not a warrior's death. This is not death for the emperor. This is just death. Terrible death. When the fire tank came to my position, I could not face it. I ran. I surrendered to the first American I found. I am ashamed, but I could not burn. I could not. The shame that Nakamura expressed was genuine and widespread among Japanese prisoners. They had been taught that surrender was the ultimate dishonor, that death was preferable to capture under any circumstances. Yet they had surrendered anyway, driven to it by a weapon that made death itself the thing to be feared. American forces recognized the psychological dimension of their success and sought to exploit it further. Psychological warfare units broadcast messages in Japanese, describing the flamethrower tank's capabilities and urging surrender before the flames came. Leaflets were dropped showing photographs of burned Japanese positions, with text explaining that surrender was the only way to avoid this fate. The effectiveness of these appeals was limited by Japanese reluctance to surrender under any circumstances, but they were not entirely futile. Intelligence officers reported that captured Japanese frequently mentioned the leaflet, saying that they had prepared them psychologically for what the flame tanks would do. Some said the leaflets had influenced their decision to surrender. The battle for Iwo Jima officially ended on March 26, 1945, though scattered resistance continued 4 weeks afterward. Of the approximately 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 were taken prisoner during the battle. Nearly all the rest died, many of them killed by the flamethrower tanks that had proven so devastatingly effective. American casualties were also severe. Nearly 7,000 Marines and sailors were killed, with another 19,000 wounded. The battle was among the bloodiest in American history, a price paid for an island that would prove vital to the final campaigns against Japan. The flamethrower tanks had done what they were designed to do. They had broken open fortifications that conventional weapons could not penetrate. They had killed defenders who would have exacted a higher price from infantry attacking without armored flame support. They had, in ways impossible to quantify but undeniably real, shortened the battle and saved American lives. The cost was measured in a different currency. The men who operated the flamethrower tanks, who pulled the triggers that sent fire into bunkers and caves, who heard the screaming and smelled the burning, carried marks that no metal could honor and no time could heal. Corporal Willis, the flame gunner from Sergeant Leeming's tank, left the Marine Corps after the war and never spoke about his service. His family later found a journal he had kept during the battle, its pages describing nightmares that began on Iwo Jima and never stopped. I dream of the fire, Willis wrote. I dream of the screaming. I wake up and I can still smell it. That sweet, awful smell of burning men. I did what I was told to do. I did what had to be done. But God forgive me for what I did. God forgive me for what I became. The flamethrower tanks would see further action in the Pacific, at Okinawa, and in operations planned for the invasion of Japan itself. The invasion never came, rendered unnecessary by the atomic bombs that ended the war in August 1945. But the weapons were ready, and the plans called for their extensive use against the fortifications. That intelligence indicated honeycombed the Japanese home islands. How many Japanese would have burned in those planned invasions can only be estimated. The fortifications on Kyushu alone were believed to be more extensive than anything encountered in the Pacific War. The civilian population, unlike on the Pacific Islands, would have been present in the millions. The flamethrower tanks that had proven so effective on Iwo Jima would have been deployed in greater numbers, with improved systems capable of projecting fire to greater ranges with even more devastating effect. The atomic bombs spared the world this horror, though they substituted a different horror in its place. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, fire came from above, incinerating tens of thousands in seconds. The screaming that had echoed through the tunnels of Iwo Jima was replicated on a vast scale, in cities rather than fortifications, against civilians rather than soldiers. War is fire. Fire is war. The flamethrower tanks of Iwo Jima made this ancient truth visible in ways that could not be unseen. After the war, captured Japanese documents and interrogations of surviving officers revealed the full extent of the psychological impact the flame weapons had achieved. A report prepared by the Japanese Army's research section in April 19, while the battle for Okinawa was still raging, analyzed the Iwo Jima experience. The American flame tanks represent a weapon of unprecedented terror. Their effect on troop morale is severe and immediate. Soldiers who have witnessed flame attacks on adjacent positions show marked deterioration in fighting spirit. Instances of abandonment of position and surrender have been observed in units that previously demonstrated the highest combat discipline. Countermeasures against flame tanks have proven largely ineffective. Anti-tank weapons require approach to close range, which brings the attacker within flame range. Fortifications designed to resist conventional attack are highly vulnerable to flame, which penetrates apertures and spreads through interior spaces. Recommendation: research into flame-resistant fortification design should be prioritized. However, it is acknowledged that no practical countermeasure to flame attack has been identified. Units facing flame tanks should be prepared for severe psychological impact on personnel. The recommendation for research into flame-resistant fortification was never implemented. There was no time. By the time the report was circulated, the American forces were already on Okinawa, bringing their flamethrower tanks with them, preparing to burn Japanese defenders out of caves and bunkers just as they had on Iwo Jima. The Okinawa campaign would prove even more devastating than Iwo Jima. For both sides, Japanese civilian casualties numbered in the tens of thousands, many of them killed by flame weapons used against positions where soldiers and civilians sheltered together. The horror of Iwo Jima was replicated and amplified on an island populated by hundreds of thousands of non-combatants. General Suribachi, the architect of Iwo Jima's defenses, did not survive to see the end of the battle. He died on the island, probably on March 26th, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. His body was never identified. In his final message to Tokyo, transmitted on March 17th as his command disintegrated around him, Suribachi wrote of the flame tanks, "The enemy flame weapons have proven more effective than anticipated. They negate our prepared defenses and cause severe morale impact. Future defensive planning must account for this capability. I regret that I cannot provide more detailed recommendations. The situation here does not permit systematic analysis." It was a commander's final report, clinical, even in extremity, focused on lessons learned rather than the personal horror of what was happening around him. But between the lines, the terror of Iwo Jima's last days is visible. The defenders were being burned out of their holes, and their commander could only watch and record. The lessons Suribachi hoped to transmit were never fully implemented. The war ended before Japanese defensive doctrine could adapt to the flame weapon threat. In a sense, this was fortunate. The adaptations that might have been attempted, deeper fortifications, more dispersed positions, greater use of civilian shields, would likely have increased casualties on all sides without meaningfully changing the outcome. The flamethrower tank had proven itself a war-winning weapon against an enemy that relied on fortification and fanaticism. It was the ultimate answer. It burned out the fortifications and broke the fanaticism. It reduced the defensive calculus to simple survival mathematics: surrender, die quickly by other means, or burn. In the decades after the war, the flamethrower gradually fell out of favor in American military doctrine. Improved explosive weapons, precision-guided munitions, and changing attitudes toward incendiary warfare all contributed to its decline. The United States officially abandoned flame weapons in 1978, though other nations continued to use them. The veterans who had operated the flame tanks like combat veterans everywhere, mostly kept silent about what they had done and seen. The flamethrower crews of Iwo Jima returned to civilian life, raised families, built careers, grew old, and died. Their memories went with them, shared with few, if any, carried in private to the grave. Occasionally in interviews or memoirs, fragments emerged. An elderly man describing nightmares that never stopped. A veteran breaking down in tears when asked about the smell. A dying soldier whispering about faces he saw in the flames. Japanese faces, burning faces, faces that visited him every night for 60 years. The Japanese survivors, fewer still, carried their own memories. The screaming, the smell, the terror that had broken their warrior spirit and left them ashamed, surrendering to an enemy they had sworn to fight to the death. Private Nakamura, the soldier who had surrendered because he could not face the flames, lived until 2003. In his final interview, conducted shortly before his death, he was asked about his experience on Iwo Jima. "I have lived with shame for 60 years, he said. Shame that I surrendered. Shame that I was afraid, but also I have lived. My children have lived. My grandchildren have lived. Because I surrendered, because I chose not to burn, we are here. Was it worth it? This shame for this life? I still do not know, but I remember Hayashi, screaming in the flames, screaming for 2 minutes, and I think perhaps I made the right choice. Perhaps living with shame is better than dying like that. Perhaps." He was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant, looking at something only he could see. "But I still hear the screaming," he said. "I still smell the burning. Every night for 60 years, I have been on that island, watching my friends burn. The fire never stops. It never goes out. It burns in my memory forever." The flamethrower tanks of Iwo Jima achieved everything their designers intended. They broke open fortifications. They killed defenders. They shattered morale. They shortened the battle and saved American lives. They also created memories that would haunt men on both sides for the rest of their lives. They demonstrated that modern technology could make war not merely deadly, but hellish, not merely terrible, but apocalyptic. They showed that the human capacity for creating suffering had no practical limit. On Iwo Jima, American ingenuity met Japanese determination, and fire was the result. The fire burned everything it touched: fortifications and flesh, courage and conscience, bodies and souls. It is burning still, in the memories of those few survivors who remain, in the histories that record what happened on that volcanic island, in the lesson that war offers no victories, only different degrees of loss. The smoke is cleared from Iwo Jima. The tunnels have collapsed. The bunkers have crumbled. The black sand has covered most traces of the battle. Japanese and American tourists visit the island now, walking the beaches where their grandfathers and great-grandfathers fought and died. Sometimes, they say, you can still smell it. That sweet, awful smell that Corporal Willis wrote about in his journal. The smell of fuel and flesh and fire. The smell of what human beings did to each other on this island, in this war. In the name of victory, the flamethrower tanks created that smell. They created the screaming that echoed through the tunnels. They created the terror that broke the Japanese spirit. They created the nightmares that followed men home and never left. They won the battle. Whether they won anything else is a question that each generation must answer for itself. Standing on that black sand, smelling that lingering smell, hearing, if they listen closely enough, the echo of screaming that has never entirely stopped.